Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this incredibly important conversation on match official shortage. The shortage is being called a crisis in Canada, and we know from the Canadian sport policy renewal research process that there's many factors at play, from officials' abuse to lack of recruitment, training, compensation. And I'm excited to jump right into this conversation. And I think we can just start with a bit of a roundtable with everybody, getting to know a little bit about who you are and your opinion and your thoughts on what you're seeing in terms of the officiating crisis. Sonia, maybe we'll start with you. Just I know you have such a wealth of knowledge in the area. So if you wanted to jumpstart us off here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm a former FIFA referee, soccer, football, whatever we call it, and currently director of development and programs at Soccer Quebec. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. The officiating crisis is really predominant in the world at every level, at every sport. It's a big problem. We do have official, but I think every sport would say they have a shortage of official. And then in less than 2 years of experience, I think everybody agreed that we lose 75% of our officials. So that's major. So we do have some, but we lose them because there's not enough support. The job is too demanding. There's a lack of time, lack of family work demand balance in there, lots of intimidation. In soccer, if I may say, the increase of violence is incredible. Everything's permitted. And I would say, like every other sport as well, where the spectators or the parents have too easy access to the athletes. I mean, they can't jump on the ice in hockey, but in soccer, it's so easy. They just like walking down the field and then start a fight and something. So the verbal abuse, the physical abuse is a real problem for us, and it is increasing at a very high rate. So we hope to cut that part. In other sport, it doesn't exist really, but they still have a shortage of official because there's not enough money. It's based on volunteers and so on and so on. So it's quite complex, but it's there.
Thank you, Sonia. Really kind of laid the landscape in terms of who we're looking at and where folks are right now and in the level of their officiating. Rhonda, maybe I'll turn over to you to give yourself an introduction as well as tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the officiating crisis.
Thank you. Yeah, I am currently working as the executive director of baseball of PEI, and I moved here for this job from British Columbia, where I was the president of the baseball officials organization there, and work with Baseball Canada in program development for officials resources and mentorship programs specifically. So creating resources and training programs, modeling for official programs on how to develop their officials at all levels from the top to the bottom. I'm an international official for Canada and have worked internationally as well with World Cup and Pan American Championships and those sorts of things. So that broad oversight really helps me out in Canada with my portfolio here, knowing the scope of the work that gets done from the grassroots to the international level.
Thank you, Rhonda. And so maybe from your perspective, what do you think we need to know about this crisis, thinking about some of the factors that are at play?
I will say that I thought a lot about this, and I would say one of the biggest challenges that we are facing is that officials do not feel valued as a partner in the game. There is a once removed feeling that we've got these coaches, we've got these athletes, these people that really mean the sport, and then we have the officials. It's like they're this necessary piece, and they don't get the same development, they don't get the same sponsorship, they don't get the same PR. Nobody talks about the great things the officials do. We see highlight reels of athletes or coaching episodes, but rarely do we see TSN feature, wow, what a great call that official made. Did you see the position that they were in? Boy, that takes training and instinct. So and we need to create a value proposition for officials to draw them into the game like the athletes and the coaches do.
Thank you, Rhonda. I think that's an incredibly astute insight. And I know, David, you have a lot to speak to this. Maybe if you want to give us a bit of an introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about what you think we need to know and include in this conversation.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my background, I've been a hockey referee for 25 years, but I've also been a researcher in sport officiating and kind of in the global area of anything to do with the psychology of officiating. The big thing, and Rhonda spoke to it a little bit there, I think the big thing is that we focus a lot right now on abuse, and we think that that's the main reason that sport officials drop out. But it really is so much more than that. There's so many job demands. There's the feeling, I always talk about officials feeling like they're independent contractors, which speaks kind of to what Rhonda's saying. They're not partners within the game. And so my message around this has been that, yes, we should try and change abuse and try and reduce that. That's a great thing for the sport in general, but let's not confuse that with actually seeing a huge change in retention. And I think there's a lot more that has to be unpacked to get to that point.
And so I think, Sonia talked a little bit, David, about, the numbers that we're seeing across Canada, and Rhonda talked a little bit about training, and you talk a little bit about here, just the ability to retain. So to me, that brings up the question, how are we actually bringing officials into sport? How are we getting people to come in to be a part of this community? And how are we actually, what's the work that's happening on the ground right now that we're using to keep them in that sport? I know, Rhonda, you have a lot of expertise in this as well, so I'd love for you to jump in as well. But maybe, David, if you want to start us off with just kind of talking about how do we best get officials into the game in the first place, and then how do we keep them there?
Yeah, so I think we don't do a great job of recruiting, intentional recruiting. And maybe there's some organizations out there going, yes, we do, but you're in the minority if you are. I think, we overlook the idea of having some sort of application interview process to make sure we get the right people. We overlook advertising to athletes who might be nearing the end of their careers and saying, hey, have you thought about officiating as a good way to stay in the game? And so I think there's some opportunities for that recruitment that we're really not doing. As for the retention piece, the research tells us that if we have officials who feel like they're part of a group, if we have officials who are getting educational opportunities to get better and feel like they're competent at what they're doing, and if we have officials that feel like they have a little bit of control over their pathway and kind of the progression they might see in the sport, if we meet those three things, and they're not that hard to do, we tend to see a much better level of retention.
Thank you, David. Rhonda, would you like to jump in here? I know you have a lot to say about retention, training, mentorship, and bringing folks in.
100%, David, that you just launched the platform right there. We really do need to have quality programming for officials. The tribe, we always talk about the tribe, and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, but I always say you got to be a little bit odd to be an official, because we're an animal of a different kind, because we have this thick skin and we put up with this abuse, and we're okay with that so long as people don't cross the line, because we know that it's a hard job and somebody's got to do it. But we have to find the right people, like David said. It's that not everybody's cut out to be an official. And some people have really bad experiences because it just isn't the right job for them. So if we have these ways of identifying through mentorship, you know what? I see some talent out there. So, one of the things we've done in baseball, I come from British Columbia, where we developed just a fantastic mentorship program, is to have people, sightlines, watching you all the time and bringing forward the names of young prospects that are like, this is a guy or a gal that needs to be on a development path. And then you focus development on them. They feel somebody values me. We're giving them skills at a higher level. We're challenging them, but keeping them in a safe space and setting them up for success. And we see tremendous retention and growth and progression. Like that statistic about after 2 years, we lose probably 75% of most new individuals. When you put them on this trajectory of someone recognized me, gave me personal attention, helped me grow my skills without an evaluation piece. It's simply coaching feedback like a coach would a player fielding a ground ball in the field, that in-game feedback. You know what, next inning, go out and try this. And then they have success and it's like, oh, I'm winning. So having something to attain and regular feedback and coaching mentorship, 100% the most effective way we have found to retain officials.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I want to jump a little bit over to Sonia, because your lived experience is exactly what we're talking about. You stayed with the sport. You've been doing this for a few years, give or take, right? And so tell us a little bit about your experience and what's kept you in the sport and in officiating, but specifically as a woman, how have you grown and found mentorship and training and support in the space?
Yes, thank you. David and Rhonda already touched like a few important points, but to retain and recruit official is one key component, and it's true. In less than 2 years of experienced referees, we lose 75%. This is for all sports together, so that's major. And when we look at the reason why we're losing those people, imagine if we could keep them all, we wouldn't have a shortage of referees. Every year we would be increasing the number, but now it's the total opposite. We're losing 20 to 40% worldwide anyway, like every year. It's absolutely insane. And some of the reason that comes up first is, and David touched upon that, it's the lack of time, and then the family, the work demand of the job. It's very difficult. The intimidation that you get while you try to do your job, and then people lose interest because of this. There's also too much pressure sometimes. The cost of traveling, the equipment, and then the low paycheck salary for the games. So when you look, and the lack of recognition, of course, that was mentioned as well. And then comes to the violence and the injuries, and then other reason why people are leaving our game. So once you know that, then this is like how it's going to drive, like how to retain those people. And basically for me, it's a ton more of support, better training, better collaboration, better match assignment, even more money, because some sports, it's actually like total volunteer duties that they have. And then for soccer, yes, we are paid, but there's also another problem with the T4 that the government now is asking, which is another complete problem that also, affects some people. But with everything that's been said, yeah, is to promote and to say how beautiful it is. And then Tolu, you said it. Like I was a referee, international referee, refereeing for 29 years. And what kept me in the game is like, because I loved it. And I've said to the world that this is the best job ever. And I incite everybody to do it because I had so much fun doing it. I've traveled 95 countries. I have friends everywhere. Yes, I was living in a suitcase, an airport, and a hotel and all this, but it is fun. And maybe not as fun now during a pandemic, but we're almost out of it. And then there's a lot of beauty. And this is what we need to talk about. Maybe not the small percentage of or isolated case of violence, despite that this is increasing too fast. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I think.
Thank you, Sonia. And David, maybe I'll actually get you to jump in, touching on a little bit of what Sonia just said there, in terms of just looking at all the very many factors that we have to consider when we're retaining and bringing in officials. But what does the research say about the strategies that are best right now in terms of being able to bring folks in and helping them stay and retain them, but also maybe diversifying who we're seeing in the officiating space?
Yeah, the probably the number one thing we see is that if there's organizational support, we're going to see better retention. And that organizational support can be in a number of different ways. It could be simple things like having some more informative teaching sessions for new officials. For hockey referees, they often take new officials on the ice for an hour or two and work on positioning on the ice. It could be things like having more of a social group where they help build a bit of that social rapport between the officials and make them feel like part of a group. It could be recognition. I gave an example before of how I used to work in an association where at the end of the year, they did their year-end banquet and awards, and it was the players and the players and the parents and the coaches, but they also invited the officials, and they gave out the year-end officiating awards in that banquet, and you felt like you were being recognized and part of a partner within the sport. And we think about these things like these aren't hard. Like it's not hard to pull these off. I think a lot of it is just conscious attention to the fact that officials are part of the game. And if you're not making them a partner within that game, then you're likely going to see continued dropout and this rotating, revolving door of officials coming in and out.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate that. Ron, I'd also like you to jump in here too, from your perspective, particularly around I know you talked a little bit about mentorship and training. When I think about, women in sport generally and women in officiating is even more of a nuanced space. Do you have any perspectives on that and how we can bring more folks into that, more women into that space, and how do we keep them in that space? Maybe what are some of the barriers that we're seeing to actually having women in officiating?
I think it depends a lot on the sport and how many females you have playing the sport, what your opportunity for officiating is. I happen to be in a sport that's very low women participation. So soccer, I would say, Sonia, you see thousands and thousands of women playing soccer, and we do not see thousands and thousands of women playing baseball because we were all told 40, 50 years ago, women play softball. So part of part of the strategy in my sport it sounds cliche, but if you can see it, you can be it. It's getting our women out there in front in the coaching capacity, in the officiating capacity, in the scorekeeping and groundskeeping. Our Canada, one of our technical officials that went to the Olympics this year was a female technical official, and she was in charge of the grounds and approving things. And people were like, "Oh, she's in charge." She was the best one for the job, regardless of her gender. But people took notice because it was a woman doing something traditionally that a man would do. So I know my favorite story here in PEI was the first time that I did the senior league here as a plate official. And I got a phone call from a mom at the end of the next day at work. And she said, "I have to tell you, you impacted my daughter yesterday." And I was like, I'm thinking, I didn't say anything to a kid that offended somebody, did I? And she said, she saw you umpiring the senior men's baseball league behind the plate. And she was like, "I want to do that." And she said, it never occurred to me that that I would cross her mind to want to be an official, because she's only ever seen men on a high level baseball field. And now she wants to be an umpire. So I think it's really important that women get put when they're qualified. I'm not for putting people in places where they're not going to be successful or where they don't belong, but we got a lot of qualified women that we just need to get out in front of people to show them that, yep, we do this too. And so can you.
For sure. That's it. I mean, as a woman in sport myself, I feel that, I understand that, I get that. I encourage more women to get involved, and I love that you're talking specifically about this officiating space. David, how about you?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in there as I've got a few projects in our lab ongoing about the experiences of female sport officials. And, one of the biggest things that's come out, this was part of a survey with about 900 or so female officials, was the biggest change they wanted to see was advertising that showed female officials in that officiating role. And that they felt that if there was more of that, you would start to get more stories, just like Rhonda said there, where people would see like, hey, this is an opportunity I can do. And I think we've got sports that we have many female officials, and we think about many of the judged sports that have female officials, but in a lot of our traditional North American team sports, that's where it's missing. But the other part in the other study that we're running here, it's showing that the same things that keep officials in terms of, education, some training, mentorship, feeling like part of the group, those are the biggest things that keep women in the game as well. And so if we can target some of those strategies and tailor them a bit more to female officials, we're likely to see them be recruited and then also be retained.
That's right. I know, Sonia, you had we talked about a story that you maybe perhaps want to share in this space about actually the framework changing so that women or folks could bring their families and their children along with them. Do you want to share that story for the group?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just before that, it's really important that we have role model, but you'd be surprised that in soccer, football, it's only since 1994 that we have international women referee. And I was the first one on the list, and we were like total alien. In 96 was the first Olympic that we had women referee in soccer. So it's fairly new when you look at this. But what we've done the last few years is we've changed a little bit the structure to respond to the demand of like keeping the women official in our game. So for all those years, we were not allowed to travel accompanied. So we were going for a World Cup or Olympics for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then leave our job, leaving the family. And it was difficult. Before that, if you were pregnant, you were losing your license. And then you have to wait another year and pass all the fitness tests, all the medical tests and all those things. So now you don't lose your license anymore. So what one way that we help the women is like, okay, you get a year off, take your time, take a nice break, get back in shape. When you're ready, the door is wide open and we will welcome you as our first priority. We'll give you the first chance. So that was a big change. The second big change is since we couldn't be accompanied when we were traveling, it was difficult. A lot of ladies were like, no, I can't leave my two months old at home alone, or and so on. So we start to allow the ladies to bring their child with a member of their family to take care of the child during the competition, but they could see one another at night. And actually that made it like even better referees, because they were there, they kept their concentration, they did their job. There was no fast tracking or like, oh, you have an exception because you have a child. No, the demand was the same. So it was equal for everybody, but they could have the support of having their one member of the family and their child around, which really made them a better person, a better referee, and much more stable in the duty and the pressure that they have to handle. So those two were successful changes, but like very recent.
Sonia, you, Rhonda, David, you've all kind of touched on solutions that seem fairly straightforward. Marketing, training, having a mentor in place, changing the framework so that people can bring their kids and family. These don't seem like massive changes that organizations would need to make to actually have officiating become a part of integrated into their communities. So maybe, do you have any, in your own opinions and your own ideas, specific examples of ways or tangible examples of ways that these organizations can actually support the officials that are already there, and then supporting the officials that want to get involved in the sport? Maybe David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I often use analogies, and one of the analogies I use is sport officiating. It's like growing a tree. Like the things we do now will have the biggest effect 20 years from now. And so it is really important that we start making some of these changes. For the officials who are currently working, kind of specific to your question there, I think one of the biggest things is the self-reflective question of, are we making our officials partners within sport? So can we find a way as a sport organization to involve them, whether it's like a coach-athlete meet or coach-official meeting at the start of the year? Can we find a way to, advertise who our officials are? Can we find a way to recognize them at year-end banquets and things like that? I think those steps from an organizational point would make a huge help. And if you do those things, again, kind of going to analogies here, if you get cut off driving, you get pretty mad. But if it's a friend who cuts you off, you kind of let it go. If you do all these things, the same thing will probably happen with that toxic relationship we sometimes see between coaches and officials. If they know who the official is, they're more likely to respond in a better way, even if when they're not happy about what the decision has been made. So I think if we start doing those with the organizations, we'll start to see some effect. And then the officiating organizations can start looking and saying, okay, what are we doing in terms of the training? Do we have mentors? Do we have educational sessions? Are we giving them the tools they need to succeed? The problem becomes that often those require resources, either in terms of time, money, or people. But again, if the sport organizations want to make a change, they can start, sending some of the money toward the official organizations and see if they can put some of these measures into place.
Thanks, David. It really speaks to just integrating officials as a part of the whole team. It's a circle. It's all of us together, right? Rhonda, how about you?
So one of the projects that I'm working on right now is marketing what I want to call the 360 athlete. And it's based on a principle that I stumbled upon in the beginning, the seeds of it, 25 years ago, when we had a rep level team and we wanted to up their game and help them be better athletes on the field. So we decided to put them through the officiating course because we thought if they knew the rules better and they understood what was going to gain them an advantage from an official's point of view, that it would advantage them as a team. Out of that, we ended up with 2 or 3 kids that said, this is actually fun. I think on my days off, I might go umpire, the younger kids, and they're going to pay me to do this, and I get to play baseball in a different way. So it's like what David was talking about. It's marketing being a coach or being an official as a way to develop your craft as a player. And sometimes you find those gems coming out of that. But once you have taken that team of individuals, that particular team, it was a 15U AA boys team, they treated the officials differently after that because they'd all had to take their turn knowing the pressure and how hard it is to make those calls on the field and to know where's the line between a ball and a strike and depending on the level and the safe and the out and the nuanced parts of the game that aren't cut and dried where you have to use judgment, that everybody from a different vantage sees something different than you, but you're on the spot to do it. And until you've experienced that emotionally on, holy cow, everybody's looking at me, I have to make the decision here. when you're a player now and you know how hard it is to make that, and the official makes that call, you might think to yourself, yeah, I don't agree with that, but man, I bet you that's probably what she saw from her vantage, because when I was there, I had nothing but what was in front of me, right? So I think that holistic approach to developing officials in that partnership is building it more into the sport and exposing more people, the coaches, the athletes, to the officiating end of it, so that they have that perspective when they're on the other side of it in working with officials and how they treat them and how they value them, because they really can't run the game without us. We cancel youth sports all the time because there's no officials for the game match. So,
I mean, it's impacting everyone, not having the officials on the court. I mean, and what you said, Rhonda, it sounds like a framework that can be implemented really across different sports. Am I correct in saying something like that?
Yeah, it's a model. Actually, we did it in British Columbia, and as I'm digging in here in PEI, I find that the government doesn't have nearly as much pre-approved accreditation through the education department. So that was another carrot that we had for our kids. If you're an athlete or a coach or an official, we have accredited programming that's going to get you credit in school and build your leadership portfolio as a well-rounded athlete and scholarship material. So here, I want to find a way to engage the government in saying, what more can we do for our athletes, and encouraging this, and even get, the government involved in saying, you know what, let's get some pathways going so that we can give athletes, kids, coaches that are starting younger on a pathway to encourage them to actually do this. And they're going to get something else for it in their graduation portfolio at school. Kids are always looking for something else to pad their resume or to a skill set or their leadership. There is no better way to develop leadership skills than to be an official.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree. I definitely keep that perspective. Changes how you play, it changes how you coach, changes how you engage fully with that game. Sonia, as someone who is currently in that world right now, what, in your opinion, can organizations do tangibly to support officials in sport better?
A few things have been mentioned, but I would add like 4 quick ways of what to do that is simple, that wouldn't cost an arm and a leg, and that's feasible, and it's working for us. So the first thing is a good mentorship program on and off the field. So what we do is a team of 4. We're trying to have like a very strong referee, for example, 2 new assistant referee or a new 4th official, and then mix the team so the more experienced official can give back and help them doing their job while it's happening. At the meantime, we also have a pretty large group of off the field support, naming assessor, supervisor, educator, or mentors that come and watch the games and give them like really deep feedback after the match, and are there to protect them, but to like help them improving their skills. And we do this like almost every game that we can. And then we pay those people as well. And then they're often like former referees, national or international, and people with experience, or like people that could really give good feedback. So that's number 1. Number 2, very quickly, is between coaching clinics and refereeing clinic, we're trying to help one another by sending a referee or an instructor to a coaching clinic, explaining what we do, explaining some laws of the games, explaining what we have to go through. People have no idea that we have 6 fitness tests a year, that we have to go to a medical test, that we have to do like a bunch of like courses and spend some money and et cetera, et cetera. So understanding this is one thing, and also to tell them, okay, you have a hard time to understand the offside rules? All right, let's talk about it. And then we educate the same way the coaches are coming to our clinic, and then they tell us about like a game plan, tactical aspect, why the people are diving, simulating to try to get a free kick, and that kind of stuff. So we exchange, and it really help one another to understand the game. So that's working really well. In each team for the younger level, we try to, I wouldn't say force, but to incite every team to have at least one referee in their team. So you're under 14, you're under 15. Okay, come on, we're going to pay you the course. Send a player that is like is volunteering themselves to attend the course, and then get the knowledge that he would share it with his friends and all this, and that helped the team to understand all this. So, and that's easy to do. And then normally there's always 1 or 2 that would want to follow that clinic, and it helps us officials to be understood and to do our job, and sometimes even to calm his players on the field, because now they understand this rule, this part of rule. The other thing that we do in the last one very quickly is all the videotaping. More that we tape the video, the games themselves and all the incident and the calls and the positioning and the communication and all those aspects, we can give like clear feedback to the referees, and now they see themselves. Because after 90 minutes of game, if you tell a referee, oh, do you remember at minute like 52 when you did? No, they don't remember most of the time, right? So by having the video, the visual, then they know exactly, they see themselves. And that's brilliant because they can really improve that aspect of the game. So it's really, really working. And it could be like amateur video, as long as you follow the referees, or you know, it's made for this, and then very successful.
I love all the suggestions you had, but I really enjoyed bringing the 15-year-olds in to come and take the course alongside of us. I think that's a really wonderful idea. I also love the GoPros attached to the body cams and just watch the game as it's being played live. David, I know you have maybe some thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I was going to talk about that in two ways. Like what Sonia's saying, so many teams at so many different sports and so many levels record everything anyway. A great partnership is just sharing those videos. Like, hey, here's a repository that will put the video in for the sport organization that the official can then access. Cost them no money if it's already being done, and they can watch themselves. But yeah, the other part that I was going to touch on was this idea of using video in two ways, that we can put, you know, a GoPro or a body camera on a sport official, and they can use it educationally, but we can also use it as an advertising piece of like, this is what it looks like, and try and play up the idea that, you know, there's challenge, and in many sports there's activity and there's decision making, and you know, it's kind of fun. And you know, again, you have front row seats to every sporting event that you're doing. And I think if we use those videos in those two ways, we'll start to see more education, but also maybe advertising better to potential officials.
I absolutely love that idea. I think that would be an incredible viewpoint to capture and to, you know, document. Everything that you've all said today, they're very tangible, some of them very low cost, easy to implement solutions, training, integrating your officials into the overall sport, making sure folks know who these officials are so that they're a part of that community. That'll help reduce abuse. Lots of really incredible words, lots of wisdom. Just a quick roundtable. Anything else you wanted to share with the community of listeners that we have today? Maybe Rhonda, I'll start with you.
I think one of the key things that everybody can do, whether you're involved with sport or not, is think about how we treat officials like we would treat a colleague at work. I had a conversation with a coach who had a little bit of a flare up on a field, and I said, what would happen to you if you did that at work to another colleague? Well, I probably wouldn't have a job anymore if you disrespect people and call them names and poke them or whatever. We just don't behave that way in a workforce. So just encouraging parents, coaches, spectators, everyone to think, how do we treat people in every other way that we are in life? And then we take all of those parameters away on a field and think that we can behave differently here with mostly young people, youth. So my 2 cents, if I could give to anybody that could be talk positively about officials and value what we do in the game like they're the essential part that we actually are.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful way to wrap some of this that we talked about up together. Sonia, any last words for the community?
Yeah, for me, education is really key. Let's educate our spectators, our parents, our coaches, official, everybody at every level of each of the sport to avoid the sanction. But at the same time, we need sanction as well, because in soccer, we had a lot of violence and it's increasing. So yes, we educate people, but if there's no sanction, it's going to continue to go downhill. So we need this to break the pattern if there's some violence. So being proactive and then reactive is very important for me. But I would like to say that I hope that we get more official in all sports, because all those 29 years, really, I had the best seat in the house in every game I've done. All of them.
I bet. Front row seats to every single game.
Absolutely.
Sign me up. David, any last words for the group?
Well, first, I'm so jealous of the front row seats that Sonia had all those years. It would have been amazing. I'll go a slightly different thing that I haven't talked about yet, and it's obviously coming from my background as a researcher, is we need more research. And to do good research, we need sport partners. So like I'm partnered with a few national organizations right now to look at referees' mental health. And the best research is done when there's buy-in from those organizations. And if organizations are out there thinking we need to learn more about something, like how do we teach someone to visually track something in an environment and make a decision? You know, we do research for these things. So hopefully we see that as research calls come out, we get sport officiating organizations saying, yes, like let's be involved in some way. Let's share calls for recruiting with different officials in our organization and be part of creating that evidence that we can keep using to better the officiating beyond some of the topics we talked about here today.
Thank you, David. Really great way to wrap it up. Let's get more voices out there, more people, more marketing, integrate your officials into the sport. Rhonda, Sonia, David, thank you so much for joining here. Such an incredible conversation. I hope everyone took something away today and hope we get to change the script of what's happening right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So to get started, we have a number of questions that have been rolling in throughout the discussion. The first one that came in, we talked a bit about women, encouraging them to get into officiating roles, but how can we encourage the recruitment of officials from other historically underrepresented groups in sport? Any of you have a place to start with that?
Well, yes. Okay. Thank you, Veronica, for the question. I think we have to use the people in place already. The people that love the games, that we don't have to sell that part. So, for example, coaches or former coaches, athletes that like maybe can't play anymore because of an injury. I know in soccer, the job of a referee is very physically demanding, but maybe another sport where you officiate volleyball, if you're injured, you still can sit on the chair and then share your experience and then be a very good official. So, I mean, let's use all our people that are already involved, that already love the sport, and that would be a first step. And after that, let's go out there in schools and then promote our beautiful job that we have, and then try to incite anybody, athletes from other sports that would have like a spare Saturday here or there to officiate a few games. So there's different ways, but yeah.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
I think, first of all, hey, Veronica, I haven't seen you in a while. I like when you look at Tracy's questions in the Q&A, like they kind of speak to the same thing about like resistance within the organization to make any sort of change. She used the words like the old boys club, and that is so real in so many sports. I think where you see that less often is when the sport organizations have the sport officiating body within their purview. And so like we're having some changes out here in Newfoundland where basketball, for instance, they have a separate officiating organization, but they're now being brought in under the auspices of Newfoundland Basketball Association. And I think when some of those things happen, you get the sport association itself trying to make change because they know we need officials, and we can't just have officials who are 55 and older because in 10 years we're screwed. And that's when you start to see some more changes, is when that happens. The other part is that when we start to see more sports making changes and other sports lagging behind, there often can be those kind of comparisons of like, oh, well, what are they doing that we're not? How come they're getting good officials and we're, being raked through the coals on the quality of our officiating and all this sort of stuff? It's like, well, it's because they're actually making change and you're not. Tracy, the question you're asking, it's not a quick fix. But I think those are a couple of things that when those things happen, we will start to see some more changes within and less resistance within the organizations.
Great, thank you, Dave. Another kind of related question that came in is, we know that referees face abuse at times in their workspaces, and one audience member wondering, is there any evidence that women officials face more abuse than men who are officiating? And how can we address the potential for violence or abuse that women might face, in particular in officiating roles?
On this one, Veronica, I would say physically, and I can only speak for my sport, and maybe Sonia has a different experience. I think that there's very few opportunities in my sport where violence would be issued against me. Mostly it's verbal. And I think for women, there's an assumption that we have to really prove ourselves to be there much more so than a man. And I know my husband always has said to me right from the beginning, gosh, when you walk out on a field, you already have 2 strikes against you, not to be cliche in baseball, but when a well-dressed, well put together, athletic man in a good uniform steps out on a field, there's an assumption that they belong there because they look the part. I walk out on a field with all those same qualities as a female and people go, are we being pranked? Like what, when, I've never seen a woman at this level working as an official before. Is there a film going on? Like there's that sort of a thing. So there's a little bit of mockery. There's a little more, I don't think men get called, well, it's okay, honey, on the field. I don't think that men get referred to in terms of endearment on the field. So the abuse is more critical of, I'm going to treat you differently because you're a woman. I'm going to speak to you differently. That has been, the experience of the women that I've talked to, is that you don't get taken seriously enough, or it's really nice of you to come out here. So I think the younger girls really come out with a challenge against them. But the younger we start, and we said this in the previous segment, when you can see it, you can be it. And so the more women that men get used to seeing on the field, and the more women that are showing their proficiency on the field. Now that I've been doing this, and I'm sure Sonia has all the respect of all the people that have worked with her. Now the men that I work with, I don't have to prove anything to them because they've seen me work and they know that I belong here. But we have to get to the point where people remove that assumption that women aren't qualified to be there and that they're just trying to represent. That's a check mark that you're here, and get to the point where we're all qualified to be here just like the men are, and it will become more normal the more of us that they are. And I think we're on a progression. It's going to take us a while to get there, but I think that's one of the challenges, the numbers and the optics, and people just need to see us here, and we're not going away. We're good at this and we love this game too.
The research itself, there's not much on there. It kind of echoes what Rhonda's saying. There's not necessarily an increase in abuse of female officials from what we can see in the research, but it's the type of abuse, that it's often gendered or patronizing or both. And that's what we see is just a different kind of abuse as opposed to necessarily more frequent abuse.
Well, I've lived it. And then I can say, Rhonda, you touch a lot of good points as well. I do believe that the women's official, at least in soccer in the last 40 years, had more abuse. Verbal abuse, physical abuse, even sometimes intimidation and that kind of stuff. You really had to be twice as good as a man to be able to get a little game, because too many people, just because of the gender, said, no, she can't ref a game. It's a men's professional game. There's no way. So I broke the ice game after game after game, country after country. And when you go to Brazil and Salvador, when there's 60,000 people, men in the stand, and you're the only woman in the middle as the head of referee, it takes some balls, right? It takes some guts to do it. And they try really to influence you, go back to your kitchen, and you hear everything. You really have to deal with this abuse all game long while trying to do your job twice as better than somebody would get away with a little bit easier with things, if I may say. Unfortunately, it has changed a little bit that I've seen, because there's more women, they're more role model, and we're not seen as alien as much, but it's still there. Believe it or not, it's still there in 2022. So it is a tough job, but now we're trying to give tools to the officials, to the ladies, to fight this. But when you look the part, then you're fit. I was on a mission myself, to do the men's fitness test, because in soccer we have the women's fitness test, roughing women's game, the men's fitness test, roughing men's game. My goal, and then that's what I incite to all ladies official, surpass your limit. Go on, do the men's fitness test. So when you do that game, nobody can say anything, because you deserve to be there. You've proven yourself, and then you're just as good as anybody. And actually, ladies in many jobs are little bit more perfectionist or a little more attentive to details, and then therefore they often are great officials.
That's great. And thinking, I guess, in addition to kind of giving women in officiating like the tools they need to succeed in those roles, what are maybe some takeaways for sport organizations looking to kind of change the narrative, shift the culture a bit to have women kind of, like you said, get more women in those officiating roles, have them viewed as just as credible as the male officials, all of those things. Any suggestions on that end? Go ahead, Rhonda.
I think David touched on this earlier too. It's in how we advertise this. All of the optics that we have around sport, especially at higher levels, for the most part, they're men. They're men playing it, they're men coaching it, they're men officiating it. I just had a female coach, for example, in my office last week, who just went to the national championships as a female coaching a male team. And she was commenting to me how when people met her or talked to her, they're like, "Oh, are you the trainer?" And she's like, "No, I'm the coach." And they're like, "Oh." So I think it's this, get them out in front, put us on the posters, put us on the advertising, make sure that we're integrated. It's not just, oh, it's a group of girls, therefore it doesn't pertain to boys. Mix us all together, because that's what we do. I rarely get to officiate female baseball because there isn't enough of it. I have grown up and spent my time officiating men's and male baseball, but you would never see me on a poster officiating a game as an advertisement. It would always be a man. So let's encourage the organizations and the government to do some advertising around this that shows women in those roles and capacities, doing the things that we're actually doing, not as a minority, but as a normal part of the game. Because when you can see it, those young women coming up in the system are going to say, "That's what I want to do. She did it. I can do it too."
Great. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit with some of these audience questions. So I'm going to quote from one of them. "I'm thinking about my university intramural experience where officials, such as the audience member, are hired without much training or onboarding. Have you thought about integrating official education in university settings?"
I can jump in on that one. I was in the US for 6 years teaching down there, and we actually had like an activity course in our program on sport officiating. And the goal was to train officials to do the basics for basketball, indoor soccer, and volleyball. And so you took this course, you did all three of those things, just the very basics. And you were then qualified to teach or qualified to officiate the intramural sport at that school. And it became a great way to get people to get into the program, to get into the idea of officiating, to get some course credit for it. And then once you did it all, to also get a little bit extra money for it by doing the intramural sport. It's not necessarily a perfect system, but it's an easy one to try and implement in universities across the country of like, hey, let's just have like these 1 credit courses, teach some basic skills that people could use as sport officials in intramural sport, and kind of fill that need and see how many people become interested in doing it on a grander scale than just intramurals.
Great. Anyone else on the panel, anything to add on that?
I agree. It should be compulsory. We should, not just for the physical education program at university, but every other field, because it should be sold as like, this is a great hobby or even a full-time job for like some people, and let's promote that. I've been working with Sported, a nice organization in Quebec against violence in sport, and instead of like talking about violence, we promote the great job of official, all in a positive way. Not that we ignore the difficulties of it, but we're selling the job as like, this is so fun, and those are the advantages, and so on and so on. So every high school, college, university, every organization, we should talk about it, and I think it's part of our job to promote this.
Great. And I guess thinking beyond university settings, we've had a few questions come in around creating a national official association. So kind of a question around, what would it take to create a national officials association similar to, let's say, like the Coaching Association of Canada? And how could that play a role in regulating some of the issues we might see in officiating? Go ahead, Dave.
This is something that we talked about at a recent workshop here in Newfoundland with sport officials. The challenge is time and money to create that, and people. But the benefits, even though we look at sport officials being so different across sports, the benefit is that if we have something like that, then we can start to offer maybe different types of, almost like your multi-sport coaching courses, multi-sport officiating workshops and modules. For instance, we have stuff on communication. We can have stuff on game management. We have stuff on fitness, nutrition, because all these things matter. It doesn't matter what your sport is. All of those will matter to being good as a sport official. It also then starts to create a bit of a network between sport officials. It starts, again, building some of those partnerships between the officials and maybe the sport organizations. So absolutely, this would be a fantastic thing to have. And there's a lot of benefit to it. It's just that initial momentum to get time and money dedicated toward. I think the Coaching Association of Canada is a little bit different because a big part of that was also protection of youth athletes and vulnerable athletes. Whereas maybe that's not quite the same mandate as officials might have. But maybe as people start to realize, hey, we don't have officials for our soccer games anymore and our basketball games anymore. Let's try and make some change. That could be a way to go with it.
Great. Go ahead, Sonia.
We did have a Sport Officiating Canada organization before. Maybe I'm a little too old and you're too young to have seen that, but we did for some years, all sports, and we had a small membership to pay once a year conference, but it didn't last too many years. Unfortunately, we couldn't get like enough people involved, and we didn't get any protection from this, or like. So at the end, unfortunately, it fell apart, but it does exist in the US here. There's a sport official organization, which is quite big, with a magazine with like annual conferences and so on and so on. And it does work. So I would like to see it back in Canada one day.
Awesome. Good to hear. And we have one last question just to wrap up today. What about how to be it if you haven't seen it yet? Any recommendations based on experiences being the first, breaking barriers, and what does it take?
I can jump in on this one. It actually, it's about courage, and it's really hard to be the first person to do something when there's an expectation that you're going to fail. And I think that we've had references here in some of the questions to the old boys club and the expectations, and Sonia saying we have to be twice as good to be a male to get the job. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes women standing up and being able to say, we have to do this, even if we fail, to show that we have. Because people assume that I'm weaker. There's been assumptions made that I'm not going to be able to take the pressure, that I can be criticized out of the game, that sort of thing. And some people can be. So it's going to take those of us that have the backbone and the fortitude to do this, to just have the guts to go do it, even when we know we're going to make mistakes in a public forum, and say, it's okay. Men make mistakes all the time. I've been accused of making mistakes because I'm a woman. That's why women don't belong in baseball, because of that. Well, I've seen men make mistakes on a baseball field too, and it wasn't because of their gender. It was because they made a mistake in judgment or positioning or, that sort of thing. So we have to stick to our guns and say, ladies and people that don't normally get an opportunity to shine in this sport world, have the courage to do so, because there's so many people standing behind us that are waiting for us to do this. That's going to give them the courage because they saw us do it first. Not everybody can be first, but those of us that can, please get out there and do it, and don't be afraid, because there's a whole bigger army behind you than you think there are, encouraging you, that are going to walk behind you if you will do it.
Any last comments from Sonia or Dave before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, great points, Rhonda. I would say never take no for an answer. Why not? Why not? I've done it. I was first. I was seen as an alien. Call me all names. I don't care. But you know what? Now people say, wow, oh my God, you've done it. And then a lot of people still come back to me and it's, well, how did you do it at the beginning? Well, it was a little harder, but it's feasible. And be the one that will make the change. Be the one that will be able to say that, yes, I was the first one to do it. Why not? We have to be strong. And I think we we shouldn't be discouraged by people thinking that like, oh, it's not for you, or you're too young, or you're too old, or you're a woman, or you're too whatever. No, this is we're lucky to be in Canada, in a country that is fairly open and more accepting at many levels. If you travel the world, you'll see that in other places it's much harder. But let's continue to be a country that we can say we're the first to do it, and then we're proud of it. So go for it.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap up there just to stay on track. But thank you so much, Rhonda, Sonia, and Dave. It's great having you here, and we had some really great insights today. So excited to move forward on some of these important topics.